we are setting the stage with three very fine minds who've been tracking Indo-US relations. Joining us, Ashok Malik, a partner of the Asia Group. Arun Singh, former ambassador to the United States. And Anup Wadhawan, who's been Commerce Secretary in the government of India and therefore has dealt with the United States specifically on trade issues. I appreciate all three of you joining us. The world order has been completely shaken up in the last few weeks by a certain Donald Trump. Trade, tariffs, immigration, top of the mind, and we're going to look at all those issues in a moment. I want to start, though, with the issue of trade. And the fact that the US president has said on that from the 2nd of April, reciprocal tariffs will kick in. Canada has taken it to the WTO. China is ready to hit back. Brazil says that they will take on the Americans. India is silent. I want to understand from you, and Mr. Singh, you could start first as an IFS officer. Is this strategic that India has chosen to stay silent while Donald Trump throws these warnings at the world?
So one, I don't think India has really been silent because when the Prime Minister went to the US on 13th February, in the joint statement that was issued, both sides have made certain commitments on trade. Now, obviously, at one level, Trump signed the executive order about imposing reciprocal tariffs on the day the Prime Minister landed. Now, that order was not India-specific. It was general, and it was calling for a study to make recommendations. But the very fact that it was issued on the day Prime Minister landed, I think there was a political message in that in any case. But that having been said, the joint statement that has been issued has said that both countries are now committed to do a multi-sectoral free trade agreement, and that the first tranche would be completed by the autumn of this year. And also that they are committed to take the trade from the present level of $200 billion to $500 billion by 2030. So you can make the argument that if we are doing a bilateral trade agreement, and if we are committed to enhancing the trade 2.5 times, it does not make sense to raise tariff levels from the current level. So I think that discussion will happen, I suspect, between the two governments. The Indian Commerce Minister has completed just now a visit to the US. From reports you see, including in the media, both governments, including the Indian government, are seriously looking at what kind of steps that can be taken to say that there is really no need for tariff. And final point I'll make, Rajdeep, is in Trump 1.0, Trump had imposed certain tariffs on India. India was quiet but imposed reciprocal tariffs on the United States. So I think there is a way, without making noise, to take action so that the message is also conveyed to the US side.
Are you, Mr. Wadhawan, as sanguine as Mr. Arun Singh appears that what was said in the Trump-Modi meeting seems to be at one level at cross purposes with what Donald Trump said 2 days ago, where he made it very clear all countries, including India, he specifically referred to India, will be subject to reciprocal tariffs starting the 2nd of April.
So you see, in terms of responding to reciprocal tariffs, the thing is that there is not absolute clarity right now as to what the nature of these reciprocal tariffs are going to be, what the levels are going to be. Whereas duties is imposed on Canada, Mexico, China, those are definitive, well-defined, so those countries have reacted. So just as, Master Singh mentioned in his first term, where he imposed duties on aluminum and steel, we reacted with our own countervailing duties. So I'm sure if these reciprocal tariffs come into place at certain specific, well-defined levels, then I'm sure India will explore its options. But when you're negotiating a trade agreement, and a fairly ambitious one aimed at, raising your trade volume to 500 billion, then it is pointless to disrupt things by putting these reciprocal tariffs in the interim stage. So I think our argument with the US should be that since we are now committed to a trade agreement, get these reciprocal tariffs out of the way, because they will just spoil the pitch and disrupt things.
But Mr. Wadhawan, we've been hearing about these about a trade agreement for the last decade. And the truth of the matter is, I spoke to someone in government who said for the 5 years or 4 years of Trump 1.0, every time there would be talk of that, Mr. Trump would tell the Prime Minister, what about the Harley Davidson? I mean, almost making the Harley Davidson symbolic of the failure to work out a trade agreement. Are we really ready this time for a proper trade agreement, a bilateral, effective trade agreement with the United States?
Yeah, you see, during his first term, towards the middle of that first term, this negotiation started, and then we ran out of time. The elections were on his head, and I think there was some concern he had about the Indian vote, the Indian diaspora vote in the US, so he sort of put it on a back burner, hoping to come back and then restart. Of course, there was a 4-year gap in between, so he's come back, and now it's sort of starting off from day one, and we have a 4-year window to, of course, there's a much shorter time frame which has been announced. So I'm sure this time the imperatives are much higher and more compelling, and they will lead to a specific outcome. And you know, if you look at our trading pattern, if you look at the structure of our economies, there is a lot of complementarity between India and the US. They are not a major manufacturing power. They have sort of a lot of agricultural strength. They have services strength. So I'm sure we can have a trade agreement which will be complementary, and our ambitions on both sides will get met, and our sensitivities at the same time will also get addressed. So I'm quite hopeful.
That's reassuring to hear that you're hopeful of a trade agreement. The flip side, Ashok, is that there are those who believe this is actually a good thing for India. That there are, Indian economy for much too long has been protectionist in key areas. If it requires a Donald Trump necessarily for India to lower tariffs in certain critical areas, so be it. Do you agree with that view that maybe you need a Donald Trump for India to wake up and smell the coffee?
Look, there are still concerns India would have with, say, China, for instance. With say, China, for instance. But with the US, certainly the urgency and imperative is far sharper. The last time Trump was in office, he was, as someone put it, the least prepared president, because nobody expected him to win, even he didn't. This time, he's probably the most prepared president. He spent 4 years preparing his agenda. Tariffs is an important part of that agenda. This time, the urgency to get that deal is much greater. I'll give you one example. We export iPhones to the US. We export iPhones to the tune of $6 billion per year FOB rates. The US charges us 0% duty. We charge mobile phones made in the US and elsewhere 16.5%. We don't import a single phone from the US, but the rate is 16.5%. If on the 2nd of April, 16.5% duties are imposed on Indian iPhones, or Indian-made iPhones, you can imagine the consequences. We need to have a deal for breathing space. However, I'd like to point out, reaching that deal in September or autumn will give us breathing space. It will not be the end of dealing with tariffs, because they are reciprocal tariffs. They're also sectoral tariffs, which Mr. Trump announced on steel and copper, for instance, that might extend to automobiles, pharmaceuticals, even semiconductors. This is part of his reindustrialization approach, that I'm going to impose tariffs on all imports, not just from India, from everywhere. So that's another battle down the line.
Ashok is suggesting that Trump is more prepared this time than Trump 1.0 to go ahead with his belief that you need a new tariff regime. Is India more prepared? Is India been ready to deal with Donald Trump? Or is it in some way hoping against hope that they can reach a solution? How much of this is based on optimism, genuine optimism, that we can reach a substantive bilateral win-win deal? Or how much is it based on simply the hope that Donald Trump will not trump us in the end?
So I think if you see the comments that have also come out in the public domain, clearly there is a willingness in the government to look more seriously at free trade agreements, not just with the United States. You are now looking again at the one with the European Union. You are looking at the one with the United Kingdom. So clearly there is a recognition that India lost out when China benefited from the globalization of trade and production and opening of markets. And so today, if India wants to grow, that opportunity is not there. So your opportunity will come if you want to plug into the reordering of supply chain, when there is now talk of a secure supply chain, friend-shoring of production, a trusted supply chain. So you have to look at this new opportunity. And to do that, you have to do bilateral trade agreements, you have to do multi-sectoral trade agreements. So the sense I get is that certainly there is far more seriousness and effort to make this attempt.
You know, Ashok, that brings me to the politics of it all. For the last decade, I've heard from the Modi government, Atmanirbhar Bharat, make in India. So at one level, you were talking about protectionism, make in India. Now suddenly comes Donald Trump. How do you deal, therefore, from a government which spoke of Atmanirbhar Bharat, let's make in India, let's be more protectionist. In the last budget, the 2025 budget, for the first time, we've seen a willingness to open up. Is it too little, too late? Are we being incremental and therefore being caught on the wrong foot by what Donald Trump intends to do to world trade in the next few years?
No, but what he's doing to world trade is actually upending something we also began to object to be honest. The free trade agreements of the early 21st century of 2000, 2001 are gone. They're gone forever. Nobody is going back to that era. Nobody's going back to an era where, you know, a flood of cheap Chinese imports can keep coming into your markets. Nobody wants that. That is still a problem. But limited trade deals, feasible trade deals with the US, with Australia, with the UAE, which we've already done, with the EU, possibly, with the UK. These are certainly deals that can help India, integrate into supply chains with other countries and other regions, such as the EU, can give India technology. Yet, there will be areas which we will defend. For example, agricultural imports in many sectors are still going to be a problem.
So that's precisely it, Mr. Wadhawan, because you were in the ministry. There are areas, pockets of resistance, particularly agriculture, which Ashok just cited. Given the concerns that the Swadeshi lobby in India has, how easy is it possible for India to enter these agreements in a win-win manner? Donald Trump is not going to necessarily be selective anymore and say, you know, I'll give you a reprieve on agriculture, but we'll work out a deal in some other area. Given that, is it going to be tough to reach this autumn deadline in particular?
Yeah, certainly it will be somewhat challenging. But I also, as you mentioned, see it as an opportunity for us to realize our strengths and overcome some of the unfounded fears we have. As I mentioned, there's a lot of complementarity between the Indian and the US economy. So there is tremendous scope for a win-win.
Give me an example.
You know,
where you see complementarity.
So you look at our export basket, you know, whether it is sort of moderate technology engineering products, whether it is generic pharma, whether it is gems and jewelry, whether it's leather products. And then you look at the American export basket to us, there is very little overlap. And I don't see, you know, other than agricultural products, as you mentioned, there also, I think their export basket and the kind of fruits they produce, their dairy products are at a certain niche which should not interfere with our own domestic dairy market. So I think in most sectors, the trade will happen in separate niches. And you know, you were talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat. The best way to get Atmanirbhar Bharat is to have an open economy with minimum barriers. Atmanirbhar Bharat means you realize your competitiveness. So you make it easy for your businessmen to invest and operate, and at the same time make it easy for them to access inputs from across the world, access technology. So Atmanirbhar Bharat and reduced barriers at the border go together. If you put, and I think we've realized that. We've realized that, as you mentioned in the last budget, that you cannot have barriers and have Atmanirbhar Bharat.
We seem to have realized it 3 to 4 years too late, some would say.
Right.
But Arun Singh, let's look at China. Amidst all of this, there is the China factor. If Donald Trump does enter into a trade war, as is being suggested with the Chinese in particular, the Chinese will look for other markets. And those markets will be markets where at the moment perhaps India thought they had a potentially competitive advantage. How does one therefore deal with this uncertain world that is being thrown up? Is it now that we have to redefine the way we see the world? That, as was just mentioned, Atmanirbhar Bharat may not necessarily be contradictory with the idea of being a far more open economy than we've been all these years. particularly given the Chinese challenge. The Chinese are more than willing to go across the world and take their products if the Americans impose tariffs on their goods. And they have a hugely competitive advantage compared to countries like us. Are we ready for this uncertain world? Is your diplomacy, are the IFS officers ready to change their mindsets?
So I'm not part of the diplomatic endeavor right now.
So therefore you can be more candid.
But just to say that, look, if US and China enter a trade war, this will be hugely disruptive. And it will have a huge impact on the global economy, and we would be impacted. Already with whatever US is doing with Mexico and Canada and going back and forth and for a while now postponing the imposition of tariffs, the US stock market is taking a hit. And so that impact will be there. And as you hinted, that if Chinese market access to the US is reduced, they'll look at other markets. An opportunity for us could be impacted. But at the same time, there is also a possibility that US does a trade deal with China. Because in Trump 1.0, they had done a limited phase 1 trade agreement with China in January 2020. And if you remember in June 2019, when Trump met President Xi on the margins of the G20 summit, he said to him, and John Bolton, his national security advisor, has reported, that if you buy more farm produce from the United States, I'll ease up the pressure on you. So he can do a deal with China. And you hear very often worry among Indian analysts that what will happen if US does a trade deal with China. And my argument would be that even if they do a trade deal with China, the essential element of technology competition between the United States and China is here to stay. US is not saying that I am accepting my position as number 2 in the world. Whatever there happens, they want to be the number 1. So long as technology competition with China will be there, US will find India a very, very valuable partner, because US companies have realized that to maintain their edge over China in technology, they need a partnership with India.
Again, he's giving a positive spin, some would say, Mr. Singh. There are those who believe whether a trade war or whether a trade deal with China, India should be wary, therefore, of whatever else happens in the next 12 months. Do you agree with that? That there is this China factor which is going to loom over potential trade deals globally and bilaterally?
Look, we are in a moment of great power competition between China and the US. This will have an impact on us any which way you like it. There was a trade deal between Trump in his first presidency and Xi. It led to more commodities from the US going to China and more finished goods coming back. So I don't think Trump's economic team wants to go down that route again, because that led to the trade balance coming down, the imbalance coming down, but it didn't really help the US economy, which is why I'm saying more than reciprocal tariffs, look at sectoral tariffs, which is Trump's mechanism or route, he feels, to bring back industrialization into America. Whether he succeeds or not is another matter, but we are in for a wild ride.
Are we in for a wild ride, Mr. Wadhawan? And just as are the diplomats ready, the same question I asked about the bureaucrats. Are the bureaucrats sitting in North Block ready for this rough ride that lies ahead?
I think we certainly are. And
we are.
We had an experience in the first round negotiating with Mr. Lighthizer and others. And, you know, the US cannot afford an open-ended, indefinite trade war with China. The Chinese can do without what they import from the US. The US cannot do without what it imports from China. So that is a reality we have to face. And, you know, taken too far, countries will retaliate against services. They will retaliate against their tech companies. They will retaliate against their e-commerce businesses. Mr. Trump has confined the whole issue to goods. But there is life beyond goods. There are services. All this American tech business, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Amazons, the Microsofts, once the world starts hitting him on that, I think better sense will prevail. Even on tariffs, he's seeing the market stumble. Canada, Mexico, China, he just cannot afford to do without importing all that which is coming into the US for US industry to, you know, thrive.
In that sense, Arun Singh, is there wisdom in being patient? I asked you at the very outset. Unlike other countries, India has been much more patient in responding to what Donald Trump says or does, not responding in anger. Even, for example, and in a moment we'll be looking at that issue of the deportation of illegal immigrants. Some of them were handcuffed. India has been very careful in not making statements in anger. Given your experience of dealing with Americans, is that the way to do it? Not get angry every time Trump raises up the volume.
No, absolutely. I think you should be patient and you should not be angry, but you should show firmness. There should be clear red lines about beyond which what is not acceptable to you. And I think those messages are certainly going across. In the case of immigration that you mentioned, I think the challenge is till a few years ago, the illegal migration from India was not very much. But according to reports last year, 20% of illegal migrants in US apprehended coming across the Canadian border were seen as persons from India. So this is a new phenomenon that everybody is dealing with. And if you are invested in high-skilled migration and the economic spin-offs from that to the US, I think the position has to be taken that as a government, as a society, we do not really support illegal migration. So I think the issue here has not been so much the fact of deportation, but the manner of deportation.
No, but should we have raised our voice at the manner of deportation? Should our foreign minister have been much more strident? Should he have made an argument much more persuasive, saying at the end of the day, they are citizens of this country, treat them with minimal human rights being respected? Should we have been a little bit more forthright, like it is argued some other countries have been?
No, the sense I get is that those messages were certainly conveyed. But you know, the US has certain standard operating procedures. And when they have the operating procedures, they do it, they don't listen to anyone. So we have to understand that that's the kind of entity we are dealing with.
Two things here, Rajdeep. One, Trump won this election talking about illegal migration. He needed to send a signal back home, so he used military planes for the first few deportations. Those have already stopped because they're too expensive. So the deportations now will be more regular, whatever regular means. And we can't really defend illegal migration. The second thing is about making a noise on various issues. Look, we don't have to agree with everything Trump is saying. We don't have to agree with Gaza. We don't have to agree with whatever he's... We should, I feel, just keep quiet and build domestic consensus on a trade deal. It's not going to be easy building the domestic consensus, but we need some sort of a document signed by this fall for the next round. Without that document being signed, without that trade agreement, we will be in some trouble.
What, according to you, is the biggest domestic hurdle to signing a trade agreement with the US?
You know, as Mr. Wadhawan will tell you, there are so many ministries and so many stakeholders, including states, involved, that simply bringing everyone together is enormously time-consuming. And somebody has to use a Hindi idiom, you know, use the danda and just bring everybody together. So, and that is really the job of, I guess, the Prime Minister's office here. And that needs to be done because whether it's electronics, pharmaceuticals, certain types of steel, automobile components, there's the entire technology partnership we have with the US. There's a lot riding on some sort of a deal being reached.
Yes, Mr. Wadhawan.
There are various, very standard methods of protecting your sensitivities. For instance, agricultural product, you can have some tariff rate quotas where you open the imports in some regulated quantities at some regulated tariffs. So various mechanisms are there. There's a staging mechanism where the duty does not come down to zero immediately. It comes down in 5 years, 10 years. So your manufacturers have time to prepare for it. And in trade sort of wars, if I can use the term, or in trade disputes, there are some standard protocols. And it is best to respond immediately based on the standard protocols, the way Mexico, Canada have responded, China has responded, the way we responded, when he put those duties on aluminum, steel. And then at that time also we were thinking, as to what will the reaction of the US be. So best is to just mechanically follow the protocol and put your duties.
Yes, Mr. Arun Singh, you wanted to...
I just wanted to make the point, Rajiv, that we shouldn't focus our debate only on the issue of trade based on existing pattern of production. And if you want to take that to $500 billion, you have to create new patterns of production sharing and sectoral trade arrangement based on that. So in the Biden administration, for example, the two countries had launched this major new initiative on critical and emerging technologies, and whole purpose was to do co-development of technology, leading to production sharing, leading to a sectoral trading arrangement. And something like that was attempted in semiconductors, because after that initiative, 6 US companies announced investments in India in semiconductors. Again, an attempt being made, a similar attempt in the area of critical minerals. So I think going ahead, and even the Trump administration, even though they have disowned many of the initiatives of the Biden administration, on this initiative, they've continued. They've just rebranded it. Instead of ISET, they're now calling it Trust, transforming the relationship using strategic technologies. Otherwise, it's essentially the same. So work on newer technologies, do co-development, do production sharing, and then work out sectoral trading arrangements. That would be the way to go.
I completely agree, but all of it is contingent on Mr. Trump getting some sort of a deal by autumn, frankly.
Now, are you saying that Trump, this deadline of autumn,
I think he's
is a
serious about
serious deadline, or is it simply a negotiating tactic? Because
I think
according to a report by Nomura, India is considering reducing tariffs on more than 30 items, increasing its purchases of US defense and energy products to prevent higher reciprocal tariffs. So, I mean, is India being pushed to the wall? And we are not being told the full story. We don't know what happened in that Modi-Trump meeting as well. I mean, Mr. Singh is smiling when I said that. So I just wonder whether there's a spin as always being put on what the reality is actually on the ground.
I do believe meeting Mr. Trump's expectations of more market access in India for certain goods and commodities, for a smaller trade imbalance, is something the government here is also serious about addressing.
I think we shouldn't unilaterally give any concessions because they'll be swallowed and pocketed. And then the trade discussions will start from that point. So we should be, very quick in getting down to a negotiation. We should make sure the negotiation gets expedited and reaches a conclusion quickly, but don't give unilateral concessions because those will just be pocketed and, put on the side.
No, the buzz is we've already made certain concessions which we are not revealing to the Indian people.
Yeah, those are very minor adjustments, but as a strategy, I won't advise concessions to be given unilaterally because they'll just be pocketed and taken off the calculus, off the table.
Mr. Singh, when you smile like that, I wonder whether your long period as a diplomat makes you believe that what happens behind doors is very different from what happens outside. Outside, Mr. Trump made it out to be that Mr. Modi is the master negotiator. And, he was praising the Indian Prime Minister. The Indian Prime Minister was praising him. But there is also the buzz that behind closed doors, Mr. Trump has been a very tough negotiator and India is willing to make certain concessions already.
Well, you can always speculate till you actually see a concession. And I don't think so far we have seen in reality any concession.
Very minor concessions in the budget.
Those are minor.
Well, that was before the visit.
I'd call them minor gestures. They were minor gestures, but I don't think we should take them further. And I don't think we will.
So in conclusion, as we reach the end of it, how do you see this all play out? Is there, amidst all the noise, the headlines that are being made, and Mr. Trump is headline a day because this is the attention economy in which he lives, how do you see this playing out, Ashok, in the short term? Do you believe that the dust will settle down once this initial seeming disruption stems a bit?
Look, given the way he's responded to many other countries, China, Ukraine, of course, Europe, I'd say Trump has signaled that India is not really a problem for him. He doesn't see India as a problem country. He sees India as a friendly country.
Does he see it as a priority country?
That's another matter, but it also depends on how we incentivize him, if we actually build a bilateral trade relationship to something significant, where we have something to sell, we have something to buy as well, then it becomes a priority country. It's up to us as well.
A final word from you, Mr. Singh, because I had Fareed Zakaria on the show who said the real challenge for India is not so much trade and tariffs, it's going to be the strategic partnership and whether that strategic partnership holds.
So absolutely. So if you see among those invited to the inauguration, were the Quad foreign ministers, including the Indian foreign minister. The first multilateral meeting they did was of the Quad foreign ministers. The Indian Prime Minister was the fourth head of state or government to be invited, and with a focus on West Asia and basically the Indo-Pacific area. So given all that, and the way they've defined the relationship now, branding it as compact, catalyzing opportunity for military partnership, accelerated commerce and technology. So certainly India has priority in the Trump administration. That bit is clear.
We should leverage all the non-trade issues also in finding a way forward.
Fair enough. use soft power, use the fact that Indian services are so valued at the moment in the United States, and plenty more. Hopefully, we can create a win-win situation between the Trump administration and the Modi government. Mr. Wadhawan, Arun, Singh, Ashok Malik, pleasure having you on the India Today Conclave. Thank you all very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.